Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friends, and here we are at episode 20, and my heart is really full right now. For one, because I'm excited to be bringing you episode 20, and I just checked my email before stepping up to record this episode, and I heard from someone who said this: I just really want to thank you for your amazing podcast. It has changed my life. She goes on to explain how, and she ends with, I literally binged listening to your audio, and now I can't wait for the next one each week. Again, thank you. And like just tears, right? Like just tears of love tears, like just big heart swell, right? That's how I feel right now. Like it's amazing. Like I live for being able to help people in this way. This is why I do this. It changes people's lives. And to be able to be someone who has that to offer to others, who can help people in those ways, it's one of the most joyous things in my life. So a huge thank you to everyone who shared these kinds of thoughts and feelings about my podcast, and those of you who have left reviews and ratings. I appreciate it so much. If you're moved to rate and review the podcast on Apple, that would mean the world to me and all the other women who will find it because of you rating it and reviewing it. All right. So today we are going to begin really the first in a little series here of what I'm calling flaw sight to love sight. So I've talked before about how we love to love, like loving feels so good, right? And I'm guessing for you, as for most of us, when you really think about it, you would really love to totally love your man, right? Like we all really want to feel love for the person we've chosen to spend our life with, right? That's what we want to feel because we love love, right? We don't love feeling resentful and hurt and upset and all the other stuff, right? We're not like in the marriage to purposefully have that, right? We're in a marriage to have love. That's like one of the biggest goals, right? But there is this sort of natural, almost like entropy effect that can happen when we just let our brains run on autopilot in love, in marriage, right? Our brain, as I've talked about in various places in this podcast, like naturally really loves to focus on what's wrong and missing and bad when kind of like left to its own devices. It has a natural tendency to just start noticing the negative, start noticing what's missing, what's lacking, what's insufficient, what's not going right, right? I call this flaw sight, and I talked a bunch about it, particularly in episode 6. I keep referring back to this, the two brains episode, and I've talked about it in other places, and I actually plan to do a whole episode on flaw sight and exactly why this happens another time, because there are two specific biases of the brain that really combine and lead to flaw sight or seeing the bad, right? And therefore feeling bad. So I'll get to that at some point. Although I've talked about this, I've kind of focused on the negative and how to sort of dig out of the negative lately a lot. And I want to focus more on love sight today and in the coming weeks. But for now, just know like this thing called flossite, and I'm going to go into it a little bit. It leads us to focusing on what's bad, right? And it has this tendency to happen more and more over the duration of a long-term relationship. Like you may have noticed things that didn't used to bother you about your partner bother you now, or things that didn't seem like a big deal in your partnership before do feel like a big deal now. Right? That's flossite kind of rearing its head. There's all sorts of interesting science on this, studies that show how couples like they just don't see the positive interactions that are happening like 50% of the time. Right? Because the studies like a trained observer is watching, and when the couple reports on how many positive interactions they just had, it's like a full half of what the observer observed of the positive interactions the observer noticed, right? That's because our brain like focuses on what's wrong, right? So fascinating. So taking this a little bit further, our brain loves to make our partner into the bad guy, what I call the bad other. So I want to illustrate this by telling you my famous story of the two men in my life. So the first guy, like he is kind of like hot-headed. He's kind of defensive, this man in my life. Like he's quick to react kind of intensely. He doesn't really listen to me or like really want to hear what I have to say. He's just caught up in his own like feistiness. And he tends to not really pay me a lot of attention. He'd kind of rather read the news or scroll on Instagram. He can be pretty harsh with the kids, pretty like controlling and bossy. And he doesn't tend to cuddle up with me in bed all that much when I want to, because he's like, he's pretty lazy, like conking right out, or like otherwise he's completely consumed with his book and just doesn't even notice that I am there. Right. And then I could go on and on about this guy, but I don't really want to because he's kind of a jerk. Like he's kind of like, seems like this bad guy to me. And when I think about him, I tend to feel kind of disappointed in my life and in my love life for sure. Right. I feel sad and bad because I'm married to this guy. He's my husband. Right. But I also have another man in my life. He is like this sparkly, happy, enthusiastic, sweet, loving man. Like he dotes on me. He hugs me and kisses me all the time. He comes to see me in my office, like when he's working downstairs, just to give me a kiss, right? He's sweet and like just cares fiercely about the children and wants them to be such great people, and he shows up for them. And he, like all of us, of course, he feels stressed and has a hard time sometimes, but ultimately he just really wants to feel loved and feel good, and he just wants to love me. He's just like, truly, he's just amazing, and I adore this man. And when I think about him, I feel so good, like so much love. I feel so happy. And I just feel like I'm so blessed because he's also my husband. And no, I am not polygamous. I am not married to multiple men. I have only one husband. And it just feels like two different people. Right? Depending on how I'm thinking about him, depending on what I'm focusing on. And the majority of the time, I'm seeing my husband and experiencing him, therefore, as the second man, as this man I adore and feel so blessed to be married to. I have learned how to not be carried away by flossite. And not let flossite make my husband into the bad guy. And I want this for you too. I want you to be able to feel so blessed that you're married to the person you're married to. I want you to feel so happy, so amazing in your marriage. But for many of us, getting to that place of like total adoration and deep love isn't just like a snap of the fingers, right? It's not super easy. Getting from that thinking of him as this bad guy, this bad other, as I call it, to loving him exuberantly, like isn't so easy, right? And there are stepping stones. There is a specific stepping stone or a sequence of stepping stones. And it starts with seeing him as a human other, going from bad other to human other. So I want to talk to you more in detail about what that means today. So let's look at what happens when we let flaw sight really dictate our experience, make our experience of our husband be he's the bad other, and the effect that bad other, that bad othering has on our marriage. So bad other, it's kind of like for you, it might be like you see him paying more attention to his phone than you, right? Like in my story, or not doing the chore that he would, or snapping at you, right? It's really like you start experiencing and seeing this accumulation of wrongdoings that kind of over time, kind of brings a sense of hardness into you, hardens you against him, hardens you into kind of thinking, and you might not hear these words as sentences in your mind, but it's kind of there if you look under the surface, like he's bad, right? Like he's against me. He isn't on my side. Almost a sense of like, he's kind of like the enemy, right? Now, truly, I hope you aren't experiencing this, but many of us do. And we experience it in big ways. I mean, I have clients who experience this the majority of the time at first when they come to me, or just sometimes, like part of a day or an hour here or a few minutes here. You know what I mean? Like it can come in different amounts, but it can really escalate. We can really start to see him more and more as the baddie. I like that word, the baddie. If this is going on for you, it feels like, again, like that hardening of your heart to him, a constriction and a closing off towards him, right? You might recognize it by feeling angry and resentful and even hurt, right? Feeling disconnected from him. And when that's going on, you're going to likely have a lot more tension, more arguments, more blame back and forth, more distance, right? Not the open, warm, soft, loving, cherishing experience that you want in your marriage. So I advise you to be really honest with yourself and just get curious if this is going on for you, right? If you ever feel resentment or anger or frustration or judgment of him, of your partner, this is probably going on for you, like a sense of this hardening towards him, a sense of him being the bad other. So I want you to just ask yourself, in what ways has your vision narrowed and started to see him as the bad other? And what does that feel like? So if you're listening to this podcast, you can actually pause it. And if you're in a place where you can write in your journal, I highly advise it, or just really think about this for a few minutes. Just notice how your brain has this tendency, most likely, if you're a human being, to kind of want to turn against your partner, turn him into someone who's against you. And be really clear that, like, noticing this and seeing that this is there doesn't make you bad at all. It just makes you human. This is just a human thing. We all have this tendency. So it might be interesting to think back too to the early days of your relationship. And, you know, what's usually the case is that these same things that your partner's doing now that really bother you, his same quirks, his same flaws, they were probably or potentially they were endearing to you. They were actually things you might have liked or even loved about him. And you probably didn't see these things or see him as bad so much back then. You saw him more as this real human, maybe even this elevated human, right? This very special human, right? But you loved him for these things, right? You didn't hold his inadequacies and his issues like against him, right? And if you think about it, you probably felt so much better back then, right? Because you were able to feel the softness and the love and all the good stuff of not holding things against your partner. So your work if you're finding you do have this little bit or a lot bit of seeing him as the bad other, your work really becomes to see him again as a human other, right? As imperfect, like as an imperfect, fallible, vulnerable, tender human being just like you, who struggles and hurts and messes up, but who longs to get things right, like who wants to be a good person, who wants to love and be loved. That's been the case all along. Because listen, right, like deep down, we all have an essential goodness, a fundamental kind of essence that is good. Your husband too. Right? And you used to see it, but now, now you might miss it more often than not, right? When, especially, you're looking with this flossite, like flossite eyes or eyes of habituation. The reality is he actually hasn't become less endearing than he was to you in the early days. He hasn't become less lovable. It's just that your perception of him has changed. And sure, he might be doing more of the less, the things that you don't want him to do because maybe he doesn't feel as good in the marriage as he did in the beginning because of all of this hardening that happens in you, right? And sure, in him, like this is there for him potentially too. But really, like your perception of him, this is your part of the work that you have control over and can totally change and make a huge difference in your marriage. And your perception of him has changed, right? And you can change that again. It just takes some intention, right? So the work starts with taking down the veil of this bad other, right? It's like it's like a veil over you. You see him through these lenses. I always like to joke they're puke-colored lenses, and you see him as bad, right? The work is to take off those lenses, take down that veil, and see him as human again, right? And that's not the end result we're going for, but it's the next step to pull ourselves out of this bad other hardening that happens, right? When we see him as this human other, when you see him this way, you're going to be much more likely to experience the hard stuff inside of you, the hard emotion softening, and you'll start to feel understanding. You'll start to feel compassion and connection even. And you'll feel, again, like that lovely softening happen between you because you're going to start showing up with a completely different energy. And that always will affect the dynamic in the relationship, right? So your work is to come into this place where there's more compassion, understanding, and acceptance, and there's really the softness inside of you. And this is what I call sort of like tier 1 work on this, going to like what I'm calling ultimately love site, or like feeling that exuberant, loving, passionate, yummy, good stuff in our marriage, right? We want to start here with compassion and understanding and acceptance. So here's how I suggest you start this process. I want you to get curious, because that curiosity is going to be the pathway into reconnecting back to seeing him as this human other. All right. So I want you to specifically ask and answer for yourself these sort of 3 sets of questions. And I highly advise, again, that you actually sit with a piece of paper or on your computer, but you sit down and you actually write this out. When we don't sit down and write things down, it's easier for our brains to go in 20 different directions and forget to even answer the questions we have in front of us. So put these on paper to really make the most of this, what I'm offering you here, and really answer them for yourself. Now, I'm going to give you, for each set of questions, I'm going to give you a few different questions. See which ones resonate with you. You don't necessarily have to answer every single one. But yeah, they're just like little series of questions. So the first series of questions is, what might he be struggling with? Right? What might he be grappling with right now in his life? Like that's leading to him showing up this way, right? What might have led him in the past? Like what part of his past, what's happened maybe in his past that might lead him to showing up in these like less than ideal ways? what's going on for him that has him not showing up in all the ways you'd really love him to, right? That's really the question. Like, really open your mind to that. Spend some time with it and see what you see. Let your mind actually come up with an answer to that, or answers. All right, the second set of questions. What deep down really matters to him? What do you think he really wants to experience in this relationship with you? What do you think he most cares about deep down? And I really want to advise you to be careful not to go into that like flossite mind again. Careful, because your brain might want to go to the place of like, oh, he only cares about his football games and his iPhone and having sex, right? Like stuff like that. Like, no, like let's look below that, right? Let's go deeper. What does he really care about? Not the superficial things he cares about, right? What does he really care most about deep down? Even if he's not able to show these things super easily to you, what do you know deep down really matters to him? Really let yourself, again, sit with that and see what you come up with. All right. Set of questions number 3. What do you know to be true about who he really is? Really open your mind to that. Like, who is he really below all these little flaws and, behaviors that you don't love? Who is this man really, truly, deep down? All right. Now, even just like hearing these questions now, maybe you've come up with a little bit of some answers and or if you've sat down and actually done this exercise and written down your answers, I want you to just notice, what does this feel like to see this, right? What is it like for you to see your answers, to start to connect with these bigger truths of who this person is and what he cares about and what matters to him? And what he's suffering, like what he's struggling with. Notice what the emotions are like now. Does that shift a little bit of that kind of hardening and constriction that happens when we're seeing our partner as the baddie? Right? Does that open your heart a little? I know my clients, when they do this kind of work, and when I've done this kind of work, it completely softens my heart. Right? When we see what might be more true, when we see how they're hurting, our partner is hurting, when we see what our partner might care most about, it can not only free us from our own hurt and hardening, right? Because that hardening and resentment, that doesn't feel good. It can really free us up. It can really allow us to feel compassion and understanding and love instead of all that other stuff. Because when we consciously choose to look for our partner's humanity through eyes that are, really looking for what's really true, not just what they're used to seeing, right? Not just through these like eyes of habituation, right? That's what we're doing when we're asking ourselves these questions, these series of questions. We're likely then to actually even get a glimpse of his goodness, right? That essential goodness I mentioned earlier, right? We start to see again the goodness that was always there, and we just didn't notice because of this human tendency we have towards flossite, right? We start to see that goodness, even just a little bit again, which means we can start to feel really differently around him. We might even start to find we feel more interest in who he really is, right? More curiosity or even fascination with this person we were kind of before putting in a box, right? And we may even feel like a sense of that intrigue, right? I guess that's what I mean by fascination too, like that sort of mystery about him. And feeling intrigue and mystery is always a good thing in a marriage, right? It's like a sprinkle of that little magical mystery that like, ooh, who is this being that I married? Right? right? That's always good. Add a little bit of that to the marriage. So taking off these puke-colored glasses, right? These eyes of habituation will allow you to access real care, right? And feel your heart opening again. Feel that warmth of heart again. And that truly, truly feels so much better to us. It feels so much better to you, right? Especially as a highly sensitive person. Like, we love to feel soft and understanding and compassion. Like, that's so healthy for us in so many ways. If you missed the episode, Love is the Reward, it's a few episodes ago, maybe like 17, I'm not remembering right now, but go listen to that. It's so good. It's all about this. And, feeling those emotions, feeling compassion and understanding and acceptance, like, it's going to get you so much further in the relationship. Like, it's much better emotional fuel to create a marriage and have good experiences in your marriage than those other emotions, right? It will make your marriage so much better when you're in that space. It's going to up level at multiple steps, right? If we're looking at a staircase, you're going to go multiple steps up just by finding your way into seeing this man as a human other. All right. So definitely do that. I want to share a caveat or just a little note here, which is that sometimes we might just feel too angry at our partner, too hardened towards him, right? We have too much of a wall between us to feel like we can ask ourselves these questions, to feel like we even want to feel like he's a human other. Like, sometimes we just want to feel like he's the bad other, right? I know. And you're allowed to go there, right? Let yourself be there for a while, but don't stay there. Don't overindulge in that place because it's just hurting you. It's certainly not helping your marriage. So also, like, when we're hurting too much or we're too angry, we want to be able to get ourselves to a calmer, more soothed, more comforted space before we can kind of take further steps to start to see him as this human other, to start to invite in more acceptance and more compassion and even more love, right? So, if that's the case for you, if you're finding yourself in a pretty emotional or like angry feeling place, your work right now is to calm yourself, find your way back to that comforted place, right? And then you can start asking yourself these questions and seeing him more as this human other. Now, episode 4, I think it's something like being more sensitive to your sensitive self. I would highly advise that for you if you are in this emotionally charged place and it's too hard for you to even want to go to the human other place. In that episode, I talk more about emotions and all of that. And I give you a practice that I call WINC, WINC, that will really help you have a lot of power over your feelings to help you feel comforted, help you feel in a much better place inside of yourself. And then optionally, you can go on to ask yourself these questions and start moving towards more compassion, ultimately more connection, right? Because that's what you want. That's what you signed up for when you decided to be in this committed partnership, in this marriage, right? You signed up for love and connection and closeness, and you have so much power over making that the case for you in your marriage. So tune in next week. We're going to kind of move the needle a little further up this ladder of love, up what I call the love scale, and towards more fondness and admiration and affection and good stuff like that. So be sure to tune in then. And until then, enjoy stepping into more compassion, a little bit more of an open heart, and have a great week and be oh so well.